Welcome to Non-Beta Alpha, your source for unique insights into current market trends with host Ryan Morfin, CEO of Wentworth Management Services. Today, we're discussing the global digital currency and the future of NFTs in the United States. We're joined by Michael Greenwald, Director of Tiedemann Advisors. Michael is also a speaker, writer, and commentator on international security, the Middle East, and the global economy.
Michael, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me.
So the world is awash with excess liquidity. Central bankers and quantitative easing are continuing to double down on this approach of modern monetary theory. This behavior has tremendous implications for all sorts of asset classes, stock market, financial assets, but also digital assets and art. And so thank you for joining us today and talking a little bit about these things.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
So one of the first questions I have for you is, there is this stated or unstated goal by the Chinese government that they want their currency to take more of the reserve currency market share against the US dollar. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the new technologies they're implementing to make their currency more competitive?
Sure, Ryan. So I think if we take a step back, the US dollar has been a national security hammer for years, especially the years after 9/11, post-Patriot Act, when the US was going after Al-Qaeda, illicit actors, Iran deal, dealing with Russia and debt and equity restrictions, and then obviously finding which third-party countries like China were part of either illicit activity, supporting Iran, or doing bad practices. And so the Chinese for years have been very frustrated with the US using two major tools in its kit to ultimately lead around the world. One is the military, which is why the Chinese have been building up their military arsenal for years. But really, it's been the US dollar, and it's been the US financial system. And so the Chinese stated goal of their central bank governor and their financial regime is to look for ways to go around the dollar, not to deal with the dollar, and to ultimately create alternative systems for the Chinese. And so when you look at what the Chinese are embarking upon right now, and they've been doing this for several years now, is that they have created their own central bank digital currency, not Bitcoin, not a decentralized currency, but a central bank digital currency. And it's for them, it's all about control. It's all about mining that data, being able to understand what their citizens are doing. So they're at 15 million users right now. We expect by next year to be at 50 million. And then by the Olympics, really their coming out ceremonies to the world, they could be at 1 billion. And then they have an opportunity for others to start using the Chinese digital yuan and to perhaps to begin that internationalization process, which we can get to.
Well, and so this total control of transactions will also implement the CCP's ability to really roll out the next generation of the social credit program. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think if you look at the future of the social economy and major financial centers, that is correct. But I think what's important to note is that there's a lot of, I would say, talk about the Chinese digital yuan looking to overtake the US dollar. And I think that's very overinflated. Ultimately, the Chinese would need to really reform their capital controls, their financial sector, to give people outside of China the ability to have ownership in their financial sector. And so I think there needs to be a lot of work done internally, and that would be a real signpost to the US and the international community that they were really serious about taking that leap. So I think right now it's more about figuring out ways to go around the dollar for them to increase their power, their cachet, and to do debt deals with other countries, for them to expand their access with SWIFT, the global messaging service, for them to perhaps eke their way in with countries like Saudi and OPEC countries, where a lot of transactions are done in dollars. And Belt and Road, where all the transactions right now are converted in dollars, China could in the future hold those countries ransom and force their hand to do those transactions in digital yuan, not in dollars. So those are just a few of the ramifications and why China is so bent on this.
And so rolling out this digital currency backed by a Chinese currency, it's going to give them a lot more leverage, like you said, in international relations, but also become the base, if you will, for their borrowing costs and their capital markets to either grow competitively in size and scale and liquidity to the U.S. capital markets, which I think has been one of our national assets that since the founding of the country, Alexander Hamilton, we've been able to really leverage high performance growth and GDP, real GDP growth, because we've had a healthy capital market system. If China's able to do this, they will be on par with us from a capital markets perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's accurate. The liquidity of our capital markets is a national security tool, the global competitiveness tool. And it's something that it's a reason why people around the world want to trade with the United States. It's why they want to be in the United States, and why so many sovereign wealth funds are allocating assets to the U.S., especially in recent years. You've seen the Gulf sovereign wealth funds follow others like Temasek and others. But I think what's important, Ryan, is to note that China could be setting really the best practices for other governments who like control to get into this game. And so ultimately, China just signed a major economic deal with Iran. And I think the fear is in the coming months, with really not much progress in the US, European, Iran approach, Iran could say, well, I want to go operate outside of SWIFT. I want to operate outside of the US dollar. I'm going to look to my partner in China and set up a system backed by our central bank to have my own digital currency so that I can do more trade and ultimately enhance the economic prowess of our country in Iran. And I think the concern is that others who feel like they've been under the hammer of the US dollar for years could follow suit.
And so it's interesting to me that this kind of, we'll call alternative financial system that could be built by China and its allies could go around the Western banking system, if you will, global banking system, and it provide a tool for bad actor states to get around economic sanctions. Is that what the potential endgame is here?
I think it's one of them. And I think U.S. sanctions backed by a strong dollar has been really the heart of a part of our national security strategy since 9/11. It's what brought Europe and Iran to the table for a period of time. It was very effective against North Korea. Still much more needs to be done. But yes, I think one of the implications is that it would make it more difficult for the U.S. intelligence community, U.S. national security professionals to understand the money trail. I think before 9/11, Ryan, Al-Qaeda would move money through the banking sector. After 9/11, the United States and the 9/11 Commission report said, the United States did a very good job controlling the banking sector. That moved illicit actors and countries outside into a decentralized movement of money. Before 9/11, a system called Hawala, a very tribal-based system of moving money, was how Al-Qaeda and other illicit actors would move money. My fear is that there are more movements of Hawala, but also digital Hawala, right? moving money where you don't know the beneficial owner, moving money where there aren't good records kept. And so there are benefits to blockchain technology. There are benefits as long as they're weeding out the illicit actors and allowing good transactions to carry out.
And that's interesting. Have the terrorism networks moved to digital currencies, do you think, or is it something that because it is such a what's the right way to put it, a clear transaction history that they've moved away from these types of currencies?
Terrorist groups and illicit actors and criminals are extremely savvy, and so they're always, 3 steps ahead. And whether it's carrying out a ransom transaction or stealing oil or a bank robbery or normal criminal activities, their movement of money is always 3 steps ahead. And so they're certainly using all types of transactions to move money. Digital transactions are one of them. You saw that the administration sanctioned a few wallet addresses under the recent Russia sanctions. Previous administrations have called this out before. Now, I think it's important to point out that illicit actors can move to different addresses and that this will ultimately isolate these digital addresses from being used. But I think, an important inflection point that came out in the last few weeks was former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, came out from Chain Analysis with a report that said that there's not much data that illicit actors are actually using Bitcoin and other digital currencies. And I think it's an important report. I have a lot of respect for Michael Morrell. I think that we do have intelligence gaps. We have data gaps still, but certainly from following terrorist organizations and seeing their patterns, they are using this. How much money is being moved? I think those are still important intelligence gaps that we don't understand the true scale yet.
Well, going back to reserve currency, Powell and Yellen have both said that they believe this is an important conversation to have. Is the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve, are they moving fast enough? Government sometimes doesn't move as fast as the tech sector. Are we at a disadvantage relative vis-a-vis China and their ability to move quickly?
I do think that we're a bit of a spectator at the moment. And I think if you had a look at an image of the Beijing Olympics and the closing ceremonies, if you look at the medal stand at the end, I think right now Bitcoin is gold. Really, the Chinese digital yuan is silver. And unfortunately, I think the U.S. and the regulators are in the stands as spectators, and I don't want us to be. So I know that the Boston Fed and MIT are working hard on this. I know the Treasury and the Fed are closely looking at this. I think ultimately, Ryan, establishing a digital dollar backed by the central bank would be in the strong interest of the United States just to enter the digital currency race. I think you saw this past week, the UK come out with that they are really closely looking at this. So I think Powell, Lagarde, Yellen, other, I would say Five Eye finance ministers should get together. And I think the United States in the coming months should convene a digital Bretton Woods. And ultimately, the United States should lead on this digital Bretton Woods, not to be the first mover, but to be the one that convenes everyone together. I mean, you saw this past week what we've tried to turn the tide on climate. We need to do the exact same effort with digital currencies and show the Chinese that they are not the only mover in this digital currency race.
And what are other advanced economies like Russia? What are they doing? What's Iran doing? Do they have their own type of central bank currencies that they're going to digitize?
Well, Russia, like China, has felt the hammer of the U.S. dollar for years, and Russia is starting to develop a digital ruble backed by the central bank. And so I would expect that their pilot programs and what they're going to roll out is very similar to what China's doing. Putin-like the leader of China, is all about control. And so that will follow a very similar suit. I think if Iran, they have a very savvy central bank governor. They've been under pressure for years by U.S. sanctions. I would imagine that they are developing white papers right now, and they are asking the Chinese, given their new relationship, to help them develop a central bank digital currency. But let's remember, outside of Iran, Russia, and China, you have 60 central banks studying central bank digital currencies and ultimately looking in the next 3 to 5 years to roll out pilot programs and to bring this into their economies. I think what's important to note for your listeners is the difference between a central bank digital currency, which would be backed by a country's central bank and their monetary system, versus a digital currency like a Bitcoin, which is decentralized and which is not backed by a central bank. And really, both of them have very different purposes. I think the beauty of a central bank digital currency is oversight and the ability to have enough AML, CFT controls. And I think if the United States does it wisely, it will help with financial inclusion. It also speed, it'll be cheaper. And also when hopefully there's not a next crisis and we need stimulus payments delivered faster, that will allow for speed as well.
So is this going to be where, like, we have social security cards and numbers that are stolen all the time by, data breaches? Will we be getting a digital wallet from the government that they can then put a digital asset into?
I think that's the idea, that every American, if they choose to, again, choice will be very important here. No one will be forced to have it. In China, they'll be forced. But in the United States, I think a clear choice and an act of Congress will be very important. Yes, Americans can have a digital wallet. There will be an education program. This will likely be rolled out in certain pilot cities. And ultimately, I think you'll see certain credit card companies get involved in this. You'll have companies like Stripe and PayPal and Square really be working right now for the economic architecture of what this digital dollar could look like. And let's remember, I think this would be a boost for the United States. I think this would be a boost for our Silicon Valley, our tech firms, given what Shenzhen and China are doing to ultimately roll out their own version of digital money.
Well, given that there's these privacy concerns, civil liberties, right? We saw in COVID that, Americans don't like being told what to do. Look at what's happened in Texas where, the mask mandate was aggressively fought. Where on the flip side, you look at places that are, more homogenous in terms of government control, like China. Liberty, choice, privacy, those are active trends in the population here. Can the civil liberties folks get comfortable with the privacy of the data? I mean, the way I look at these digital currencies is whatever you buy is going to be, on the blockchain. It's going to be part of the permanent history. And, most people are like, well, I have nothing to hide, which is fine. But that data can then maybe be used to market to you, or the lack of privacy as a consumer maybe unload a whole bunch of new issues that we hadn't really had to contend with.
I think those will be major concerns, Ryan. I think we're going to have to be very thoughtful in the United States how it gets rolled out, the terms of art, the education, the choice. We're going to need to be very careful regarding civil liberties. We're going to be very careful of privacy, and it's going to have to be very clear why are we doing this now? What is the purpose? How this is very different than China. And I think if you look at where we are with the US and China right now, it's a bipartisan issue. And so I think if it is coined in a global competitiveness perspective, which it is. We're innovating. We're moving forward as the global supreme leader. I think we need to really change the narrative, Ryan, and beyond and say, why would a digital dollar be good for the world? How could a dollar, dollars are very good for the world, but ultimately they have been used more as a national security tool than as an economic booster for years. And so I think we need to change the narrative and create an alternative to what China's doing. But yes, the civil liberty issue is going to be just like the vaccines right now. I do think it will become politicized, and I think we're going to have to be very careful. It's going to have to be rolled out bipartisan-wise. And so I think you're going to need both parts of Congress getting behind this and understanding that this is part of our global competitiveness. It's been good to see bipartisan legislation on China go forward. And so I think if it's under that umbrella and it's rolled out under that umbrella, I'm optimistic. But I do think it will fall victim to civil liberty.
Peter Thiel recently came out and said he thought that Bitcoin was a financial weapon for the benefit of China. Can you unpack that comment and what he's getting at?
I think it's important to note that China does not consider Bitcoin to be legal tender, full stop. And so I think that China views anything that threatens its currency to be a threat. And they're all about control, as we've said. So I don't think that Bitcoin is in the interest of China. I think that China has been looking for ways to go around the dollar, and Bitcoin is a way to go around the dollar right now because it's decentralized. But I think Bitcoin and China are not on the same page, given that legal tender status. So that's sort of how I looked at his comments and unpacked it, Ryan.
And so if you were brought back to the Department of Treasury to come and lead this, we'll call it New Bretton Woods project for digital currencies, how would you go about building, consensus or building standardization in this next chapter of fiat?
Sure. So I think it would need to be bipartisan run. Number one, this would need to be really a 9/11 type commission effort, but an action oriented. And I think you would need to make sure that there was first working level conversations between the U.S. Fed, Lagarde's team at the ECB, and ultimately other, I would say allied G7 countries around the world, first at the staff level. And ultimately, I think it would be important to frame this as an ongoing effort to share best practices, where the United States doesn't need to be the first out of the gate, but I think we have that convening power. And so I would really have it be at least a year-long effort where the U.S. and their allies would be meeting, and then ultimately we would have a digital Bretton Woods where we would each come together with similar best practices. I think if you look at what the UK rolled out recently and how they're using the private sector, it was a very sound approach. And so I would hope that we could learn from the Brits what worked for them and work with their governor and the Canadians and others to ultimately form that. So I think bipartisan would be extremely important. So this would have to also probably have a special committee in the House of Representatives, because I do think if we were going to establish a digital currency, there would need to be an act of Congress.
Bipartisan approaches are very hard to find today in the political environment that we're in, but one of them is regulating the tech industry. Do you see the future tech regulations that are probably coming in the short term? Will that inhibit our ability to, disrupt, currency and move into a digital asset?
I think it may, because I think so much of their efforts right now are to respond and to be on the hot seat. And so I think we are stymieing some of the innovation coming out. And that is, we need our best minds right now to be working around the clock to be innovative on not only how we're going to create the economic infrastructure to create a digital dollar and to be competitive in this race for the future of money, but we need to make sure that illicit actors are not entering our financial system through cyber approaches and others. So I think the pendulum needs to swing a little bit more to the middle, Ryan. And I think, unfortunately, we are going to see a very deep approach against tech for a while. And I think if the United States is going to be truly successful being innovative in this future race for digital currency, we need these firms. Just like on cyber, there needs to be a public-private, robust dialogue where we're sharing information, because the government does not have all the answers, nor should it. This should be a balanced approach between both.
Well, to shift gears a little bit, I mean, another impact of quantitative easing globally correlated is its impact on markets. And a great example of that is a non-beta alpha market, the art market. Can you talk a little bit about how digital currency or digital assets are changing the art market today?
Sure. So I think, it's important to know that digital, art's been around probably since the 50s, but the asset value now has reached a true inflection point. And we saw this with the Christie's Beeple sale. I think it's interesting to note that the proceeds of that 69 million was not converted to Bitcoin, but was converted to dollars. It's just an important flag in the ground regarding the money trail of a transaction like that. But yes, we are in a decentralized mindset, Ryan, and artists feel constricted by the canvas. And so they're looking for ways to have a direct relationship between the artist and the consumer, to cut out the intermediaries in that art transaction. And so it's very exciting. I would say that you're seeing expected contemporary artists like Urs Fischer get involved. Damien Hirst is getting involved as well. I expect more contemporary artists to get involved in this. But ultimately, it's a new audience. This is not your traditional audience of contemporary art collectors. This is an audience of gamers, Fortnite, people that see images and symbols in a different fashion. And I think it's a very positive thing for the art market. I was listening to a panel in the early days of the NFT a few months ago, and I think someone said that people feel a bit, I would say, there's a bit of a lack of a combination between Main Street and the wealthy with the high-end contemporary art market. And now there's less of that. Some view it as the Kardashianing of the art world. So some view it as now that LeBron's dunk is getting into this, and we're seeing images differently. I was at a lecture recently on Andy Warhol, as I mentioned to you, and it's so interesting to see, how Andy Warhol used the marketplace, used value, used the Mad Men era of advertising to ultimately influence his art and what he was describing. And so I think we're seeing a really unique thing play out in the art market. A few months ago, there was very important legislation that's being discussed and passed in Congress regarding the regulation of the art market. And this was really before the NFT craze really came out. And ultimately, it's one of the last unregulated markets, Ryan. And so I think in the years ahead, there's going to be a better sense of who the beneficial owner, who the identity of the people in the transaction are. And so I think that's a positive when it comes to NFTs. But ultimately, we're opening a whole new marketplace, a whole new value, and a whole new audience for people to consume art and to look to invest into art as well.
Well, and an interesting question. So I'm going to take a step back so some of our viewers may not follow, but the non-fungible tokens or NFTs are being created by artists, by models, by photographers, by athletes. And one question I have is, how does an NFT work at a high level? It's using blockchain, but how does it work?
Sure. So I think if you are making something a non-fungible token, it needs to first enter a system like Ether or Ethereum, and ultimately you become it becomes an original NFT, and it becomes minted that way. So you need to have an established network first, and then that becomes the original really JPEG image for it. And then it goes through its system and it becomes a non-fungible token. And I think what you're going to see in the next year and months ahead is you're going to see auction houses like Christie's actually establish their own tokens. And so they're going to cut out the other intermediaries and the other companies who are establishing tokens to be part of that NFT process. And I really view, Ryan, the large auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's and Phillips, I view them like the central banks of the art world. So they are legitimizing NFTs by creating their own tokens and now having an NFT auction. But right now, in order, you need to enter one of these systems like Ethereum and create an NFT, mint it, become an original, image, and then follow that process along the way. And then it's going to be ultimately like an artist does. They can sell it on their own through that system, or they can go to an auction house. And the big question moving forward are the tax implications and how do you pay for an NFT? Do you pay through Bitcoin or another digital decentralized currency, or do you pay in dollars? What does each state's financial regulations make for it? And I think that's going to be part of what the Treasury Department and Gary Gensler, as he comes in, looks at the future of the art market. And I think when you look at where the art market is going, I expect philanthropy, I expect other marketplaces to follow suit in a similar fashion.
And I guess the place to buy these NFTs, there's companies that have popped up like OpenSea or Rarible, Grimes, Nifty, Gateway. They're basically working with the artists or the producers of these NFTs to create kind of an online portal or store for people to go and transact?
That's right. And so they are a key intermediary in this process. And I mean, some are gaining more popularity than others. Some are more user-friendly. And so it's really been interesting to see just the excitement around this. I've been advising a lot of friends and grandchildren who are now getting into this business and creating their own NFT marketplaces. So I think it's a boost for the art market, but I think there needs to be guardrails, Ryan, put in place so that it doesn't become the wild, wild west of the art market, because ultimately establishing transparency and protecting the integrity of the art market out of an already unregulated art market is going to be very important going forward. But I expect in the months and years ahead, you're going to see charities across the country use NFT digital auctions to raise money for charity. And I expect you're going to see that continue to pop up.
So these NFTs, can you buy them with dollars? Do you have to buy them with Bitcoin? Is it all the above?
So I think it really depends on which gateway you're using. The majority that I have come across, you're purchasing with Bitcoin or another currency that's decentralized, and but it really depends on who's part of the transaction. So the artist has a say, the intermediary like Ethereum has a say, the auction house has a say, and so that's really part of the contract when you're making a transaction and when you're bidding. So Sotheby's had an NFT auction in the last few weeks, and you could use either currency to purchase it.
And copyright infringement, and there's an interesting case right now where there was a model who realized some of her photographs were sold at an art gallery that she didn't know about, and so she tried to take a photo of herself and create an NFT to make some monetary consideration for her photo that she wasn't paid for. Question is, how will the legal system treat copyright infringement? Because if I go stand next to a Monet and take a photo of myself and create my own NFT, that is, I guess, an original work. How do you see the legal system handling these types of copyright infringement issues?
I think you're going to have law schools very busy, Ryan, in the years ahead. And I think copyright law it will take on a whole different part of the semester. I think there needs to be some cases in case law in this area. There hasn't been much precedent, but you're going to see schemes like this pop up, and you're going to see cases like this. Ultimately, this is part of the slippery slope, and we are in the early days of the wild, wild west, because there needs to be much more education on what you can do, who you can operate with, and what guardrails really are in place. I don't think that many regulators have fully gotten the grasp of this yet. They've recognized that the art market is an area of illicit transactions. We saw that in a case in Lebanon in the past few years. We've seen that with the oligarchs in Russia, and it's a good way to move money illicitly. And so I expect that we will see some Panama paper cases pop up in the NFT space as well.
Very, very interesting. So you buy this NFT, cash or blockchain or some other consideration. Now you have proof of, authenticity and ownership. Where do you store it? How do you store an NFT?
So you store it on one of the gateways like Ethereum and others, where you can really hold that JPEG image and keep it secure and make it that it's the only place to hold it. But when you're purchasing it, I do think that U.S. regulators would have an easier time if there was a digital dollar in place. And that would allow them to have more oversight over the transactions being taken place. I think for the Christie's sale, it was a very convoluted set of events, and ultimately they had to get guidance from the New York Office of Financial Regulation. But I think that's where we're entering into, right? What is the proper way to storage? What is the preference? I mean, the reason why Coinbase has been so popular is it's the most user-friendly. They've marketed themselves extremely well, and most people have been purchasing Bitcoin through Coinbase. So the question becomes is, what is the next Coinbase for the NFT market? And how does that become the most user-friendly? And I still think we're in the early stages of that.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, can an NFT decay, like in a painting or a baseball card can get damaged? Can there be a damaging effect, whether it's a cyber hack or some type of digital decay?
I mean, certainly you could drop your JPEG in the water, but I think that's one of the advantages of digital art is that you can protect it much easier than you can, a canvas. But like most things, Ryan, everything can be manipulated. Anything can be hacked into. And this is why I think the compliance, the protections, the lawyers and the advisors in this market are going to continue to see more and more business because most of it is educating their clients. And I've spoken to a lot of art advisors in the last few weeks. They are just coming to grips with what does this mean? How do they deal with this new audience? And what is the marketplace? What is the value? What is the resale of Beeple's tomorrow? And I don't think anybody can answer that. Me personally, I'd rather resell a Frankenthaler or an Ed Ruscha tomorrow than I would Beeple's, because I don't think we've seen enough precedent of value on what that resale market looks like. But going back to Andy Warhol, his pieces did not sell until he died, really. And it did not reach that value until he died. So it's going to be very interesting to see what does that resale value look like in an NFT market moving forward.
Well, it makes perfect sense. We had in the 20th century, analog economy, billionaires. Now we are in the 21st century. We've got digital economy, billionaires, and art sometimes follows reality. So it makes a lot of sense that this new class of art collectors may find a digital format more appealing. Well, I appreciate you joining us, Michael. At this stage of the interview, we like to go to what we call the human factor in season 3, ask you a series of yes or no questions to feel free to put to as much or little context as you would like. So first question is, now that we have a vaccine, would you or have you taken one?
I have, and I'm a believer in it. And I think it's really amazing how we've been able to produce it so quickly, and I'm proud of our country.
No, it's a new dawn for medicine, I think. What was your number one goal for 2021?
Well, I would say I got married in the fall of October 2020, so my number one goal was to be the best husband I could. So that was definitely my goal. But for 2021, it's been to educate and help educate our clients and our firm on this new era of digitization and to be proactive for it. So whether it is digital currencies, Ryan, or digital art, it's really been really an era of education. And so I hope to continue to help to be one of those thought leaders moving forward.
And what was your biggest achievement in 2020? And I think you just answered it, but hint, but I'll ask you anyways.
Definitely getting married and
there you go.
finding the right person. But I would say just being there for my family. I think we have so many silver linings in the past year. So being able to protect, our family, in-laws, and so forth, and be there for friends. A lot of people across the country have had a very difficult year. And so, where my wife, Nolan, and I could be helpful from a philanthropic perspective and roll up our sleeves, we wanted to do that.
In the digital assets area, who's a thought leader that you follow?
Well, I would say in the probably, a colleague of mine at the Atlantic Council, Josh Lipsky, who is director of the Geoeconomic Center. And he is someone that really is on the pulse, I think, of what's coming next. And so I really respect him and follow his work very closely. I would also say Juan Zarate, who is the former Assistant Secretary of Treasury, former Deputy National Security Advisor. He's someone that has dealt with these issues early on, and anything that he puts out or his company does, I look at very closely.
And I believe he's at K2, is that correct?
He is.
Yeah.
They're doing some great work. Yep, a lot of former colleagues there.
Yeah, absolutely. K2's got some good compliance resources that we use. So is there anything that you're listening to or reading right now that you'd like to share with our audience?
I would say I am very much focused on, I'm digging more into what Michael Morrell has written about regarding the lack of data for illicit transactions in Bitcoin. So that's something that I'm looking closely at. I'm also looking at China's blockchain technology and what's behind it. So that's something that I'm looking at. And then I think what other central banks are doing to innovate. And so I'm working closely with the Atlantic Council to track how other central bank governors are approaching this issue. They're doing some very good work. And then I think that really ties in, Ryan, to how that could impact the future of capitalism in that conversation moving forward. But I would say that the people that are doing probably the best work right now are Axios. They do some very strong reporting on these issues, and I would recommend that if people are really interested in following what the Chinese are doing, they are very sharp. And then also Bloomberg reporter Selena Mosin, she has a very strong beat as well, understanding what the U.S. is doing next also.
That's fascinating. Besides non-beta alpha, of course, what's your favorite podcast?
Probably Intelligence Matters by Mike Morrell. I really enjoy that one quite a bit. That is probably my favorite. I'd like to listen to more, but I'm obviously I subscribe closely to yours as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today, and learned a lot, and we'd love to have you back in the future.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Real pleasure, and thanks so much, and really appreciate the great work that Wentworth's doing.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you by StatusJet. Elevate your status. Fly anywhere, anytime, and experience the difference. Visit statusjet.com to charter your private jet today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Non-Beta Alpha. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube so you never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or simply share this episode with your friends. And now you know.
All price references and market forecasts correspond to the date of this recording. This podcast should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced in whole or in part. The information contained in this podcast does not constitute research or recommendation from Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Wentworth Management Services LLC, or any of their affiliates to the listener. Neither Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Wentworth Management Services LLC, nor any of their affiliates make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or any information contained in this podcast, and any liability, therefore including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage is expressly disclaimed. The views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily those of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC, and Non-Beta Alpha Inc. and Wentworth Management Services LLC are not providing any financial, economic, legal, accounting, or tax advice or recommendations in this podcast. In addition, the receipt of this podcast by any listener is not to be taken as constituting the giving of investment advice by Non-Beta non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC to that listener, nor to constitute such person a client of any affiliate of non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC. This does not constitute an offer to buy or sell any security. Investments in security may not be suitable for all investors. An investment of any security may involve risk and the potential loss of your initial investment. Investors should review all risk factors before investing. Investors should perform their own due diligence before considering any investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investment products, insurance, and annuity products are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, not insured by a federal government agency, may lose value.